My sister hired a PI to catch my lies at Thanksgiving. His report had her husband arrested instead. The invitation came via group text the way most things in my family did. Casually, as though the subtext wasn't already loud. Thanksgiving at Mom's. 4 p.m. Everyone's coming. Even you, Renee. Even you. 2 words that carried the full weight of 36 years. I stared at my phone in my car outside the federal building where I'd just finished a 3-hour partnership review with the Department of Health and Human Services, and I almost laughed. Almost. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I drove home, fed my cat, and went to bed early because I had a board call at 7 the next morning. That was the thing nobody in my family understood about my life, and honestly I had stopped trying to explain it. When you run a $67 million nonprofit portfolio spanning 4 states, when your organization has active federal contracts with 2 cabinet-level agencies and you are personally responsible for programming that serves over 40,000 low-income families annually, you don't have the bandwidth for drama. You schedule around it. You show up when the calendar allows, you smile, you eat the sweet potato pie, and you drive home. For years that was enough. For years I believed that silence was the same as peace. I was wrong about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Renee Calloway. I'm 38 years old. I was born the second daughter of Harold and Diane Calloway of Columbus, Ohio, and from approximately age 7 onward, I understood, in the wordless way children understand things before they have language for them, that I occupied a different position in my family than my sister Tricia did. Tricia was 3 years older, prettier in the way our mother valued prettiness, louder in the way our father rewarded loudness. He got the bedroom with the window seat. She got the new clothes. I got the hand-me-downs that still smelled faintly of her perfume. She got the car for her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass and a lecture about building character. None of this was malicious, I don't think. That's the complicated truth I've carried for a long time. My parents weren't cruel people. They were limited people. They had a template for what a daughter was supposed to be. Tricia fit it and I didn't, and they never thought to question the template itself. I was quieter. More interested in spreadsheets than social events. I asked too many questions in church. I didn't date the right boys or wear the right things or laugh at the right moments. My father called me serious the way other people said strange. My mother called me independent the way other people said difficult. What I actually was, though nobody named it at the time, was building something. I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in public policy and a minor in nonprofit administration, took a $32,000 a year coordinator position at a housing advocacy organization in Cleveland, and started learning everything there was to know about how money moved through the social sector. How grants were structured. How federal contracts were won. How a small organization with the right leadership and the right government relationships could scale from a $2 million operation to something that actually moved needles on poverty statistics. I worked 70-hour weeks. I ate lunch at my desk. I took certification courses on nights and weekends. I was passed over for a promotion at 26, and instead of accepting it, I wrote a 12-page memo to the board outlining the programming gaps I'd identified and the federal funding opportunities the organization was missing. They gave me the promotion and a mandate to chase the funding. I chased it. I caught it. By 30 I was director of programs. By 33 I was executive director. By 35, when the board restructured and 3 regional affiliates were consolidated under one umbrella organization, I was named executive director of Callaway Community Partners, which my family found hilarious because it happened to share my last name, a coincidence I'd never bothered to correct. Overseeing a $67 million portfolio, 140 full-time staff, and federal partnerships that required me to maintain security clearance for contract compliance. I didn't tell my family any of this, not really. I mentioned I'd gotten a promotion. I mentioned I'd changed jobs. My mother asked if I had benefits and I said yes, and she said good, and that was the entire conversation. It wasn't strategy, not at first. It was just that I had learned very early that my family didn't have a framework for my success. When I mentioned the Cleveland promotion, Tricia had pivoted immediately to her own news. She was engaged to Marcus Webb, whose father owned 3 car dealerships in Central Ohio. When I mentioned the executive director position, my father had asked whether nonprofits were even real jobs. When I sent my mother a photo of our organization's HHS partnership announcement, our name in a federal press release, she texted back a thumbs-up emoji and then a separate text asking if I was still seeing that man from Cincinnati. I stopped sharing. Not out of bitterness. Out of self-preservation. Because here is what I understood about my family by the time I was 35. They had a story about who I was, and new information wasn't updating the story. It was being absorbed into it, neutralized, made irrelevant. I could show up with a federal medal and my mother would ask why I wasn't married yet. So I stopped showing up with things to defend. I came for holidays, I ate, I listened, I left. And somewhere in the space that silence created, Trisha decided I was hiding something shameful. Marcus Webb, my brother-in-law, Trisha's husband of 9 years, was a man I had never particularly trusted, for reasons I couldn't fully articulate until much later. He was charming in the specific way of men who have learned that charm is a tool. He laughed too easily. He agreed with whoever was most powerful in the room. He had worked in his father's dealership business for a decade and then about 4 years ago had pivoted into what he vaguely described as financial consulting. A term I'd learned in my sector could mean almost anything. What I noticed professionally was that approximately 2.5 years ago, a mid-sized community development financial institution in Columbus began showing up in our grant landscape. The Heartland Growth Fund. New organization, well-capitalized, aggressive about positioning itself as an intermediary for federal community development block grants. They'd approached 2 of our regional program managers about partnership conversations. I'd flagged it for our compliance officer as a standard due diligence review and thought nothing more of it. There was nothing actionable in what we found. The organization existed, had the right registrations, had filed its 990s. A little thin on track record but not unusual for a new CDFI. I didn't connect it to Marcus until later. I had no reason to. Meanwhile, Trisha was building her own narrative about me. I learned the details of this from my cousin Deja, who had the rare quality in our family of genuine affection untangled from competition. Deja was 2 years younger than me, worked in HR at a hospital system in Columbus, and texted me approximately once a week with updates I'd long since stopped receiving from primary sources. According to Deja, the theory had been circulating for about a year, that I had inflated my job title, that my salary was nowhere near what I'd implied, that I was almost certainly struggling and too proud to admit it. Evidence cited included: I drove a 5-year-old Volvo, I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment rather than a house, I had not, to anyone's knowledge, purchased property. None of these assessments were wrong technically. I did drive a 5-year-old Volvo. I had chosen the apartment over a house because I traveled 40% of the time and didn't want to manage a property. I had not purchased personal real estate because I was in the process of structuring a real estate investment trust with 2 colleagues that was not yet ready to discuss publicly. But in the Callaway family interpretive framework, these facts assembled into a clear picture. Renee was struggling. Renee was pretending. And Trisha, who had always been the successful one, married well, nice house in Dublin, active in the junior league, had decided that Thanksgiving was the moment to establish this on the record. I knew none of this when I pulled into my mother's driveway on the 3rd Thursday of November, carrying a sweet potato pie from the bakery I liked and a bottle of wine I knew my mother wouldn't drink but my father would appreciate. Deja was already there, standing on the porch, and when she hugged me she held on a half-second too long. I said, "What?" She said, "Just stay calm." There were 14 people at Thanksgiving. My parents, Trisha and Marcus, their 2 kids, ages 7 and 10, sweet children who had nothing to do with any of this, Deja and her boyfriend Antoine, 3 aunts, 2 cousins I saw once a year, and a man I didn't recognize who was sitting at the far end of the living room in a sport coat, not eating appetizers, reviewing something on a tablet. I sat down next to Deja. "Who is that?" I asked. "Trisha hired him," Deja murmured. "Some kind of investigator." I looked across the room at my sister, who was talking to our mother near the kitchen door, and she looked back at me with an expression I can only describe as anticipatory. The face of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular moment. I took a glass of sparkling water from the tray on the coffee table and settled into the couch. I had not, in 36 years, once shown my family who I was. I had protected them from that information because I believed it would create more conflict than it resolved. Looking at that man in the sport coat with his tablet, I made a decision as quietly as I make most decisions. Whatever happened in the next 2 hours, I was not going to perform distress for their benefit. I checked my phone. My board chair, Evelyn Marsh, had texted to confirm our Monday call. I replied with a thumbs up. Then I put my phone in my pocket and waited. Dinner was its own kind of theater. My mother had made everything beautifully as she always did. The collard greens, the cornbread dressing, the mac and cheese that had been in her family since her grandmother. We held hands for grace. My father said the same prayer he'd said at every Thanksgiving since I could remember, and for about 40 minutes it was just a family eating together. I talked to my 10-year-old nephew Caden about the Minecraft server he'd built with his friends. I helped my 7-year-old niece Lily cut her turkey. I listened to my Aunt Rosemary describe her new medication regimen in more detail than was perhaps necessary. I ate 2 full plates of food and complimented my mother on the sweet potato pie, which she noted I had not actually made myself this year. Bakery, I said. I know, she said, a small judgment wrapped in 2 syllables. Some things never change. It was after dessert, when my father pushed back from the table with his coffee, that Tricia stood up. Before everyone scatters, she said, and there was a particular quality to her voice, rehearsed, slightly elevated, that told me we had arrived at the planned portion of the evening. I want to address something that's been bothering me for a while. Deja, across the table, put her hand very carefully flat on the tablecloth. We're a family, Tricia continued, and families are honest with each other. I love my sister. She looked at me when she said this, and I believe she meant it, which is one of the complicated things about all of this. But for years Renee has been vague about what she actually does, what she actually earns, whether she's actually okay. And I'm tired of guessing. My mother said, Tricia, honey. I hired someone, Tricia said. A professional. 30 years of experience. Not some app, not some Google search. She looked toward the man in the sport coat who had stood up from his chair. He has a full report. The table went quiet. My aunts exchanged looks. My Aunt Rosemary stopped mid-sip of her decaf. Marcus, I noticed, had gone very still at the far end of the table. The investigator, whose name I learned later was Gerald Oates, 22 years with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation before going private, walked to the head of the table and placed a leather portfolio in front of him. He was a compact man, gray-haired, with the unhurried manner of someone who had delivered bad news a great many times and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. I was retained, he said, to conduct a full professional and financial background investigation on Renee Callaway of Columbus, Ohio. He opened the portfolio. I want to note for everyone present that my professional standard requires complete disclosure of all material findings, including findings that may not have been anticipated by the retaining party. Tricia smiled. Of course. I'll start with the subject, he said. He turned the first page. Renee Michelle Callaway. Age 38. Currently serves as Executive Director of Callaway Community Partners, a federally registered 501(c)(3) umbrella organization headquartered in Columbus, with regional affiliates in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Dayton. He paused to let that settle. Total portfolio under management: $67.4 million in active programming, grant, and contract funding. Federal partnerships include active contracts with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The table was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. Ms. Callaway holds federal contractor clearance at the moderate sensitivity level. Her organization was named in a HHS press release in 2021 as a model implementation partner for their low-income family stabilization initiative. Her annual compensation, verified through IRS filings and organizational 990s, is $218,000 plus benefits. My mother made a sound. Not a word, a sound. Tricia's smile had not moved. It was frozen, the way a smile freezes when the brain is running very fast beneath it and hasn't yet issued new instructions to the face. Additionally, Mr. Oates continued, Ms. Callaway is a co-founding partner in a real estate investment trust currently in formation, projected initial capitalization of $12 million, which is why she has not purchased personal property in the past 18 months. The investment is being structured at the entity level. He turned the page. That concludes the subject report. He reached into the portfolio and removed a second folder. It was thicker than the first. He set it on the table with a sound that was, in the silence of that room, very loud. My professional standard, he said again carefully, requires disclosure of all material findings. He looked at Marcus Webb. During the course of the investigation, I identified a related party relationship that required additional inquiry. Specifically, A community development financial institution called the Heartland Growth Fund, registered in Franklin County, listing Marcus Allen Webb as a managing member. Marcus said, That's a separate matter. Over the past 26 months, Mr. Oates continued at exactly the same pace. The Heartland Growth Fund received and disbursed $175,000 in funds identified in my review as having originated from Community Development Block Grant intermediary accounts, federal funds earmarked for low-income housing development in Franklin, Delaware and Licking counties. He opened the folder. The disbursements were routed through 3 shell accounts before reaching personal accounts linked to Mr. Webb. The room had achieved a quality of silence that I don't have precise language for. It was the silence of 14 people not breathing. I want to be transparent, Mr. Oates said, looking at Tricia now with something in his expression that was not unkind, that this finding was not within the original scope of the investigation. However, the dollar amount, the federal sourcing of the funds, and the structure of the transactions created a mandatory disclosure obligation under Ohio private investigator licensing standards. He closed the folder. Copies of my full report have been filed with the Ohio Attorney General's office and referred to the relevant federal oversight agencies as of this morning. Tricia said, What? It wasn't a question. It was just a word her mouth made. Your attorney, Mr. Oates said to Marcus, should be your next phone call. Tonight if possible. Marcus stood up. His chair caught on the rug and dragged sideways with a sound like a shriek. My niece Lily looked up from the coloring book she'd been given to occupy herself, confused by the noise. This is a misunderstanding, Marcus said. This is completely taken out of. Mr. Webb. Mr. Oates's voice didn't change in pitch or volume. I'd encourage you not to make any statements without counsel present. Marcus looked at Tricia. Tricia was looking at me. I don't know what she was looking for in my face. Triumph maybe. Some confirmation that I had engineered this, that I had known, that I had somehow set the board. I hadn't. I want to be clear about that. I had not hired Mr. Oates. I had not requested any investigation. I had come to Thanksgiving with a bakery pie and a bottle of wine, and I had sat on my mother's couch and waited to see what happened. What I felt looking back at my sister was not triumph. It was something much heavier and harder to name. I said, Tricia. She looked at me. Your kids, I said quietly. Take them to the back room. For a moment she didn't move. Then she stood and she took Caden by the hand and she picked up Lily and she walked out of the dining room and my niece's small voice said, Mommy, why is Daddy yelling? And that sound followed me for a long time after. The next 72 hours moved the way crises move when you've been trained to manage them. Quickly, procedurally, without the luxury of feeling. Marcus was contacted by federal investigators the following Monday. Tricia retained her own attorney separate from Marcus's by Wednesday. By the end of the week there were public filings. Deja texted me, it's in the dispatch. I already knew. My compliance officer, a meticulous woman named Sandra Park who had been with my organization for 6 years, called me that Monday morning with a different kind of urgency. The Heartland Growth Fund, she said. I'm looking at the approach they made to our Cincinnati affiliate last year. We need to document that we declined. We did decline, I said. I know. I need it in writing with dates. For the record. Send me the template. I'll sign it today. We spent 2 weeks in documentation mode, ensuring that every interaction our organization had ever had with the Heartland Growth Fund was properly recorded and disclosed. The federal investigators contacted me twice for informational interviews. Both times I came with our legal counsel and answered every question with complete transparency. Both times I was thanked and released without complication. Because I had nothing to hide. I had never had anything to hide. That was the thing I kept coming back to in the weeks that followed, in the quiet of my apartment after long days. The particular irony of my family's story about me. The theory of secret shame. The certainty that my silence meant I was covering something up. They had constructed an entire architecture of suspicion, and the truth underneath it was simply that I had been working. That I had always been working. That every hour I spent not performing my success for an audience was an hour I spent building something real. Tricia called me in early December. I let it go to voicemail then listened to it twice. I don't know what to say to you, she said. Her voice sounded different. Smaller, wrung out. I know that none of what happened was your fault. I know that. I need you to know that I didn't know. About Marcus. About any of it. I just wanted, a long pause. I just wanted to be right about something. I sat with that for a long time. I just wanted to be right about something. That was it, wasn't it? That was the whole engine of our 36-year dynamic, reduced to 11 words. She hadn't hired a PI because she hated me. She had hired a PI because she needed to be the sister who finally caught me in a lie, needed it in the way people need oxygen when they've been holding their breath too long, and the lie she'd been waiting to catch turned out not to exist. I called her back 2 days later. I didn't tell her everything was fine because it wasn't. I didn't promise forgiveness on any particular schedule because I don't operate that way. I said, I heard your message. I'm not angry at you. I need some time. She said, okay. I said, your kids are going to be okay. Whatever happens with Marcus, they're going to be okay. She started crying and I stayed on the phone until she stopped because she is still my sister, and that means something I have not yet finished deciding what to do with. Marcus Webb entered a plea agreement the following spring. 18 months, minimum security, restitution ordered. Trisha filed for divorce in January, quietly, through a mediator. She moved with the kids into a smaller house in Westerville, and from what Deja tells me, she has gone back to the social work career she had before she married Marcus and before she became the woman who lunched and volunteered and organized junior league fundraisers and built her identity around a man who was routing federal grant money through shell accounts. My mother called me in February. Why didn't you ever tell us? She asked. It wasn't the question I expected and I didn't have a clean answer for it, so I gave her the honest one. I tried, I said. A few times early on. It didn't land. After a while I just stopped. Pause. I think I also just wanted one place in my life where I wasn't explaining myself. She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know I made you feel that way. I know you didn't. I'm proud of you, she said. I want you to know that. I said thank you. And I meant it. And it also didn't fix everything, which is the thing about mothers saying the right things late. They still mean something, they're still real, and they still arrive after 36 years of arriving too late. The REIT closed its first round of capitalization in March. $11 million. We signed leases on 2 mixed-income residential properties in Columbus and 1 in Cleveland. My name is in the operating agreement as a founding partner. I still drive the same Volvo. I still live in the 2-bedroom apartment at least until the 3rd property closes and I decide what comes next. I still eat lunch at my desk more often than I should, and I still have board calls at 7 in the morning, and I still go home most nights to my cat and a book in the specific quiet of a life that I built entirely by myself from the ground up. At Christmas, smaller that year, just my parents and Deja and Antoine and me, my father poured me a glass of bourbon after dinner and sat next to me on the porch even though it was cold and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, you turned out different than I expected. I said, different good or different bad? He thought about it. Different better, he said. Different than what I knew how to raise. I turned that over in my mind. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reckoning. It was a 71-year-old man doing the most honest thing he knew how to do, which was admit that his framework had been too small. I clinked my glass against his. We sat in the cold for another 20 minutes and I thought about Trisha in her smaller house in Westerville, and Marcus in his minimum security facility, and my niece Lily asking why Daddy was yelling, and all the years I had spent deciding that silence was the same as peace. It isn't, by the way. Peace is something you build. Silence is just something that fills in when you stop building. I know the difference now.